As in all other motorsports, the Ivory Coast Rally is about winning and losing. More than any other rally, it is also about surviving. In an average year, only 1 out of 10 cars will be running at the end of the 5,000 punishing kilometers through the West African jungle. The 1982 event was to prove no exception to that rule. The Ivory Coast sits just above the equator on Africa's western horn and offers some of the most brutal racing conditions imaginable in the 12-race worldwide competition for the Rallying World Championship. A 51-car field for the 14th annual Ivory Coast Rally was led by the turbocharged Renault of France's Jean Ragnotti, both car and driver making their debut in African road racing. Focus of most attention was on Michel Mouton of France, the driving sensation of the year and a star of the first magnitude. For the first time in the history of any of motorsport's world championships, a woman was in full contention for the title. She had already won 3 rallies during the year in her turbocharged 4-wheel drive Audi Quattro in Portugal, Greece, and Brazil, and her car number 2 was highly favored, although it was her initial campaign in Africa. Another pre-race favorite was car number 3, the Toyota Celica of Sweden's Bjorn Waldegard, a career winner of 11 events. Germany's Walter Röhrl, world champion 2 years earlier, was again leading the season standings and in position to capture the title if he could beat Michel Mouton. He needed a first or second to sew up the championship for his Opel Ascona. Hannu Mikkola of Finland shares with Waldegard the record number of 11 rally victories. A previous winner at the Ivory Coast in 1979, his mission was to boost teammate Mouton to the championship. In effect, Mikkola's Audi would be a high-speed backup car, tracking the championship contender for emergency repairs. Per Eklund of Sweden was another entrant in the strong Toyota team. The lone Lancia entered was entrusted to Italy's Enrico Vudifieri, the 1980 European Rally champion driving in Africa for the first time. A second turbocharged Renault 5 was also making its initial appearance on African dirt tracks in the hands of Bruno Sabi. The French team had months of local practice behind it in a program to adapt the turbo engines to the tropical climate. One entrant with no need for adapting to the equatorial roads and trails was Samir Assef, a native of the Ivory Coast and twice a high finisher in the rally. Assef was a valuable reinforcement to the favored Toyota team. First leg of the rally began on the Atlantic coast in Abidjan and ended after 1,257 kilometers, only 69 of them paved, in Yamoussoukro. Yamoussoukro, home of the nation's president, was to be the center of most of the rally's activity. More than half the event was run at night to avoid the wild animals that are the normal traffic on the remote dirt roads that host most of the rally's 4 stages. Rally running is an exercise against the elements and against the clock. An average speed is set between 2 checkpoints, and the teams hew as closely as possible to that theoretical pace. Penalties are assessed for arriving too early, or, much more commonly, too late. Michel Mouton's co-driver, Fabrizio Pons of Italy, checks in at one of the 57 control points mandated during the course. Terrain and weather dictate the average speeds set by the organizers, and in the Ivory Coast Rally, they varied from an average of 43 kilometers an hour to 145. The 1982 event lived up to its harsh reputation right from the start, with even the leaders collecting heavy penalty times by the first control stations. Rallying is fully organized under the guidelines of FISA, governing body for all of the world's major driving championships, and campaigned around the globe wherever the topography seems too tough to traverse. In theory, one is to drive a specified distance in a specified amount of time. In practice, it is impossible. Winning is being as close to the impossible as automotive engineering, human skill, and the laws of nature allow. A car and team are monitored constantly at the control points, the standings based upon how far a team has strayed from the established speed. Michel Mouton, needing a victory to carry the championship back to France, wasted no time in going for the laurels. She opened an early lead in the first leg and began to build upon it at every control point through the low inland hills surrounding Yamoussoukro. Mouton's only competition appeared to be the Ivory Coast itself, no one making a dent in her runaway lead. Yet she was aware of the terrible attrition that claims 9 out of 10 cars in the West African event. Just 10 years earlier, the Ivory Coast rally achieved a dubious distinction. 45 cars started, none finished. Every extra kilometer of speed adds to the risk of wrecking the car, but speed, along with stamina, is a good part of what victory requires. Mouton, as all other entrants, was seeking the right balance between pace and durability. Ragnotti and Renault were the main challenges to Mouton in the early going, and the crowd swelled along the route as the stage continued into its first daylight running. Sweden's Per Eklund was making the best run for the favored Toyota team, while countryman and teammate Waldgaard was close behind. Championship leader Rorrell, always within sight of his second rally crown, drove a steady, carefully judged race. Nicola continued to follow his teammate to be on hand if needed. The natural hazards of the Ivory Coast took their heaviest toll on the first leg. Of the 51 cars that started the night before, only 16 were still running at the end of the first day, and 5 of those straggled in after the official closing of the stage. With the bulk of the running still ahead, the field had been drastically slimmed, a normal condition for what might be the toughest rally of all. Mouton finished the initial stage 1 hour and 10 minutes amiss of the established time, but well in advance of, in order, teammate Nicola, her main competitor Rorrell, and the early pacesetter Ragnotti. All the top placings were held by factory teams, testimony to the backup crews of mechanics and wealth of spare parts. If necessary, most of the factory teams could assemble a complete new car from the spare parts, and it was often necessary. The second leg, Yamoussoukro to Odion.